Kiprianidu. Welcome to the Journeys of Success podcast, which covers the success stories of individuals who transform our world. Our special guests talk about their career paths, what inspired them, and how they contribute to sustainable development. Welcome to the first Schulte Group podcast, where we delved into conversations shaping our world today. I'm Irene Kiprianidu, the podcast host, and in today's episode, we're honored to have with us Chante, a champion in social and financial innovation, securing millions of dollars for climate projects and energy-efficient technologies globally. Welcome, Chante.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to kick off an incredible series.
Let's start then. My first question to you is, if you can share, please, a bit about your background and journey into the world of climate innovation and finance. What are some significant events or milestones that shaped the course of your career, and how have you navigated some main challenges or setbacks?
Yeah, so I want to start by saying that I've certainly had a whirlwind of a journey. I didn't actually think I'd ever work in climate, let alone technology and finance. Started out my career on the political and economic development side of things. So went to undergrad in Washington, D.C., and had the pleasure of doing a lot of political wonky things during the Obama administration. And really doing everything that you would think when you think of Washington, D.C. So collaborating with the White House, working on the Hill, collaborating on really incredible national issue-based campaigns at a think tank based in Washington, D.C. And shortly after doing a lot of those various impactful initiatives, I realized that I was sitting in the macro of a lot of things. So many times when we're talking about national policy and initiatives, they really get at the heart of what needs to happen across the board. So think about the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the incredible, funding that's coming out of that, over $300 billion dedicated to climate solutions and deployment. So on one hand, really exciting. I think on the other hand, I knew that I was getting a little FOMO from not really being on the ground and seeing how things were implemented in real time. And also knowing that you can pass policies, but ultimately they're implemented on a state, regional, and local level. And so I applied to a fellowship program that brought me to New York and ended up doing a lot of really interesting multidisciplinary projects, really spanning government, the private sector, as well as the not-for-profit and impact space. And I left that experience wondering, okay, how can I take my experience of economics, government, and ultimately, implementation of campaigns and solutions and do something different with those skills. And I ended up joining an urban strategy firm where I stayed for 4.5 years and launched our first energy, environment, and sustainability practice, as well as our first tech and innovation practice. And I did not know that that was going to be the first foray into technology and sustainability. But what I found was really taking my transferable skills from the space of understanding, hey, government can actually, and it's oftentimes a market driver for new solutions, right? Whether that's advanced market commitments, tax incentives and credits, or even, mandates and requirements around reporting. And so I think, we're seeing that not only in the US, but really on a global scale, especially when we look at what's happening in Europe. And so that really positioned me to think about the space differently. And I found myself doing what I've coined as the unsexy parts of climate technology for that span of time, where I was really working with all stages of companies. So think the largest fleet manufacturer for EVs, a leading hydrogen fuel cell company, and starting to think through how do you take energy efficiency solutions or even just low-hanging IoT like sensors to better understand how efficient a project is in terms of its energy usage. And so I ended up doing a lot of matchmaking between the innovative solutions that existed and then, many of the procurement or large scale infrastructure projects that larger corporations were building through various infrastructure projects, and created this very niche expertise that I didn't realize would be extremely critical to not only the moment we're in now, but also to how you think about scaling solutions long term. So did that really fun work, and a part of that work included, permitting, licensing, zoning, feasibility studies. How do you actually know where to deploy? And then also, how do you take advantage of all of the various pools of capital out there to not only de-risk pre-development and deployment, but also ensure the success of those projects? Fast forward to 2020, during the pandemic, I ended up co-launching a venture studio and accelerator model, which was a $10 million model focused on de-risking early stage climate technologies. And it's fun to talk to you today because one of those solutions was actually in the anti-fouling coating area. And so we looked at shipping and logistics, waste, mobility, the built environment, and really took incredible early stage ideas and turned them into investable companies. So for 2.5 years, I was a part of a team that invested in 20 companies, and really supported them in raising over $30 million in public and private investment. Since my time running the venture studio, have really been focused on how do we close this multi-billion-dollar gap for deployment of solutions. So the more capital intensive, hard technology solutions that are helping governments, cities, and corporations upgrade their sustainability strategies. And that firm is called Unoya Group. So I would say that that's been, my journey and some of the areas that I think have really, shifted the way that I think about building a career is understanding that, yes, you certainly have to upskill and know where your gaps are. But also, I think many times when people are looking to, foray into a new industry, they think, oh, I have to go back to school or I have to, get this certification and that's the only way that I'll be able to work in the space. When in reality, I think, climate and sustainability is so interesting and that you can take your unique expertise and apply that to climate. And that doesn't mean you don't upskill, you don't continue to educate yourself. But at the same time, there's a lot of value in understanding what you do already as a climate strategy and using that angle to advance your work.
Mhm. That's a fascinating career path, and it's great to see successful people like you advising the rest of us to, be able to pivot and not stuck in what we already know, but develop our knowledge and don't be afraid to change the field of our work. Building on what you mentioned about how you support companies for investing in climate solutions. We know that many times, because of the risk that it exists, they may be hesitant or skeptical in investing in new solutions, especially when it has to do with climate change. So my question to you is, how do you make the case for such investments when you talk with potential clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a question that if you work in climate and sustainability, you're constantly thinking through. I'll start with the optimistic side, which is that it's been a lot easier to make that case over the past few
Hmm.
years than it was, say, 10 years ago. So we've seen, huge amounts of capital flowing in the public and private markets into decarbonization at scale. And so on one hand, there's still a lot of work to do, but on the other hand, we are seeing immense progress, right, in terms of still making the case for investment, but seeing an aptitude that just didn't exist really years ago, even. So one stat that I like to share is that in 2022, we had over 80 billion of dollars deployed into early stage climate technologies. And 70% of all venture capital that has went into climate solutions has actually been in hard technologies. And so I love both of those statistics because, really what we've seen is a huge increase in early stage investing into some of the best solutions that, are new and novel in many ways, but I'll speak from a US lens for sure. And I imagine this applies to Europe as well. Um, a lot of these solutions have been around, but they've been sitting in national labs with really smart people and academia and PhDs that have spent their career, diving into these areas, but otherwise wouldn't have ever reached commercialization. And so what we've seen is this huge amount of capital going into early stage investment, which means that those solutions are actually now, moving into scalability and the potential for commercialization. And so I think in a lot of ways, what that has served as is a catalyst for the rest of the investment world to see, hey, the initial risk of getting through the technology or the science questions and diligencing is really starting to, or has already decreased significantly. So now what we're looking at is commercialization risk. So how do you actually scale a solution that you know works? The technology has little to no risk, and it's really about getting it out into the world and deploying it into spaces. And the hard tech statistic that I mentioned, so physical products across materials and waste or shipping and logistics, they're getting funding, and they're getting significant funding. So in many ways, we've closed one valley of death over the past few years, when before we couldn't even get, pre-seed or angel investment into solutions. Now what we're seeing are founders, operators, and companies that have built their product, have initial pilots or demonstrations, but are really struggling to get that growth capital that they need. So when I think about the cases that I make now, particularly to the folks in that space, it's really to say, hey, these solutions are actually scaling at a rate that we've never seen before. So how do we update our perception of risk? But more importantly, how do you also understand what tools mitigate those risks? And those are both diligencing and also operator tools. And that's what a lot of the work that I'm doing now focuses on. And what I found is that when people understand what their appetite for risk is and what the actual risk is related to deploying a solution or investing in a solution, then we start to get to the heart of, well, how do you create risk adjusted portfolios, right? That still have incredible returns, that understand that perhaps certain projects or technologies are riskier than others. But then if we look at incumbent solutions like solar and offshore wind, like a lot of that has been de-risked. So we know that we can see returns, and there's little to no barriers for their deployment cycle. And so that, I think, has been one of the mixed portfolio model has been one of the most, I think, creative and also successful ways of positioning solutions. But I mean, separate from that, let's say folks aren't even thinking about it in the weeds in the way that I just explained. Simply saying that, whether you think about it from an impact angle, and I do work with foundations and catalytic investors, and of course governments that care about, communities and constituents. But then, for folks who are less on the impact side, it's also about how do you sort of future proof your business, right? So if we're thinking about where facilities are and whether or not they're prone to, climate change, which most physical assets in the supply chain of corporates are, how do you start to future proof those facilities so that you're not seeing the depreciation of a huge part of your business over time? And what does it mean to be proactive about that? How do you make initial investment up front? And that's really where the exciting role of, cross sector collaboration comes in, public private partnerships, leveraging tax credits, leveraging tax incentives, making sure that as a corporate or as any big entity with physical assets, you're actually using what has been provided by the government to make it easier to implement those strategies.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, and actually very relevant for the shipping sector because of the EU emission trading system, the fuel EU. We see a lot of demand for decarbonizing the shipping sector. So it's very insightful and relevant for our sector as well. So now I want to move on to another topic. Despite the progress we've seen, fields like climate tech, finance, and innovation, they remain heavily male dominated. The shipping industry as well suffers from a similar lack of diversity, especially at sea. This is a missed opportunity, of course. Women's voices and perspectives are crucial for tackling complex challenges and shaping a more sustainable future. So you've had an impressive career scaling up nationwide campaigns and technologies. You are the founder of Evnia Group, which enables the finance and deployment of innovative solutions across various industries. A very remarkable journey so far. So the question is, how can women like us, all of us, rise to the top, become key players, and have a decisive impact on the present and future of their companies and industries?
Yeah, I love that framing and that question. I think it's no secret that it's something I've thought a lot about in my career. I mentioned the years that I was, doing project deployment, and also thinking about pre-development for climate technologies. And I do remember, quite frankly, looking around and being the only woman oftentimes in the room. And so it's an area that I find oftentimes gets couched in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are of course important. But I think more important than that is the reality that, the climate crisis is a big problem and a big challenge. And we truly need everyone's innovative ideas and angles to get us where we're trying to go. And what I saw as, one of the few women building in the space at the time was that my unique perspective really did help us move through, challenges or bottlenecks that maybe otherwise would have taken longer had I not been in the room or part of the strategy team, or even my unique perspective in understanding certain, regions or areas. I mentioned that I worked with European countries, excuse me, companies that were entering the US. And so even when we talk about diversity, of course, it includes, women and people of color, and of course, age and experience, but it also includes what has your lived experience and journey looked like, and how does that inform what happens in a strategic conversation. And so I think the piece that I always like to leave folks with thinking is not just, hey, hire women, hire, other underrepresented groups. It's also to say, like, hey, we know the data shows that more diverse teams with diverse lived experiences create better outcomes. And outcomes can be a better technology or a more innovative way of thinking about a business model. It can be a better overarching strategy. So I think that, it's of course partially how do we ensure that the folks who are hiring are thinking about, what they can do to really, attract the best candidates, which means you should be attracting, the amount of women that represent the society that we live in. So it is a numbers game to a certain extent, but it shouldn't stop there. It should really be about how do you go to places, especially understanding that women are underrepresented in the STEM community. So you may not be able to go to a science, community or an engineering community and only recruit from there. Can you go to other communities, maybe even other industries that primarily are women led, but there's interest in, entering into the field. So I think it's really on all of us to be creative and understand that being creative creates more innovative strategies and solutions. And I always like to give the example of myself and my co-lead for Venture for Climate Tech, the venture studio and accelerator I ran prior to launching Unoya Group, was launched in partnership with another woman who was the first Latina to raise millions of dollars as a hard tech founder. And, she was a founder. So she had that experience of understanding supply chain, understanding how to think about, hardware and what it means to build hardware as a startup founder. And then I spent years across companies scaling, right? All of these different innovations and solutions. And so together we were really this incredible dream team. And of course, I can say that baseline, but the data also back that up. We completely, blew all of the numbers around prior programs and models that were attracting solutions globally, to the point where our funders were like, we've never seen these numbers before. And so I think there's something there that you could argue and say, hey, when you're looking for not only diversity in solutions, but also just more outcomes, or excuse me, more ideas related to solutions, how do you actually put people in leadership positions, right? So that they also attract those people that you want to attract to a specific opportunity. So that's what we saw through Venture for Climate Tech. And then we saw it also in the cohort of companies that we ended up funding. So we funded a number of women, a number of people of color, and also many people who, regardless of race, gender, didn't come from kind of conventional backgrounds in terms of climate. They went to different schools. They lived in, regions that maybe historically have not been seen as leaders in climate. And that was really important to us, that we were finding the best solutions. And of course, the best solutions are indicative of the diversity of the world that we live in. So that's the first framing. I think when it comes to women, just to circle back to your question of, how do we enter into these roles and end up in leadership? I wish I had a kind of silver bullet recommendation on what that looks like, but I can only speak from my experience. And I'd say, have confidence in what you know, and also know what you don't know. So I think in many ways, my career has been a trajectory in constantly learning and evolving and saying, hey, I want to do more of this, but I need to understand the intricacies of that better. So I went to product school when I realized I was starting to advise engineers who didn't speak the same language as me. And so instead of asking them to stretch and understand my language or lingo, I took it upon myself to really educate, myself on the processes and the ways that they built. And that has gone such a long way, because now when I'm in conversations with engineers or technologists at large, there's an ability to actually speak their language and get them on board. So I think for women, it's build a network, continue to upskill, know what you know, and also be okay with naming what you don't know, but don't stop doing something because you don't feel like you know everything. And I run a global collective for women working in sustainability, and we see this all the time where corporates or great organizations reach out and want introductions to the women in our network. And sometimes they say, well, I don't know if I'm qualified. I'm not sure if I have the right skill sets. And we have to remind them that the corporate's asking to connect with them, right? So, like, that is an indicator that you probably know more than you think you know, or you might not be giving yourself enough credit. So, I think it's a mix of everything. It's, of course, not just on women to solve this challenge. It's on investors and funders and companies to really, employ women, but then also give them leadership roles. But I think it's also on women to say, hey, I'm doing incredible work. I know what I do. I know that I do what I do very well. And I know that I have the ability to fill gaps where there might be in the future, and hopefully support one another. So, like, really building these peer networks like the one that I've built, where we can actually be advisors and peer mentors to one another, but also share opportunities.
Mm. I love how your advices do not only apply to women, but basically everyone listening to this podcast. You mentioned the collective that you have developed for women of color in sustainability. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask you more about that. What inspired you to create this community, and what is your goal, and was the impact that it had so far?
Yeah, there's moments in life where you have a plan, and then you exceed your plan, exponentially. And that's really what the story of Woke Sis has been. We launched it. We're actually celebrating our 5th anniversary this year in July. Myself and my co-founder Jordi Vasquez.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting to think about. We thought that we were launching a casual meetup in New York, really to bring together women of color working in the space. In part because I just didn't see, like I said, I didn't see women, I didn't really see people of color. And I knew I was at this interesting and beautiful nexus of innovation, climate, and, solving one of the most challenging problems of our time. And I looked around and didn't see folks who represented, right, those who were most impacted by the climate crisis in real time. And again, I think it's important to say, like, yes, you should do it because it's the right thing to do. But also, when we think about climate and sustainability at large and innovation, like, these communities are innovative. They are innovating in real time because they also have no choice but to do so. So I say that to say that that was always my lens in the work that I was doing. And then I met Jordana, and during Climate Week in New York, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and most people in the industry, and we became fast friends. And she actually had a newsletter that she added me to at that time, where she was sharing, what's going on in New York, what events was she going to. I was oftentimes hosting dinners alongside corporates and companies that were scaling in New York, and bringing together an ecosystem of players across different sectors. And so I started inviting her to those. And then we realized that we were becoming, not just fast friends, but also supporters of each other's careers. And one day we were chatting and we said, well, what if we did this, but with a lot more women, right? And we're able to exponentially share great ideas, resources, events. And so that's how Wokesis was born. It started as a newsletter and a Google group. And then we ended up launching a LinkedIn group. COVID happened, and we went from meeting casually in person to hosting one of our first virtual summits. And we honestly thought maybe 40 to 60 people would show up. We ended up having over 400 people RSVP to
Wow.
the event. Yeah. And, there were people calling in from New Zealand, just like mentioning how much they had been desiring a space like this. And so, when you are meeting a demand in the market, you can have a plan on how quickly you think things will grow, but the market will tell you how quickly it'll grow, right? And so, yeah, Wokesys has done so much since then. We created a COVID relief fund where we were able to give clean energy workers, entrepreneurs, and leaders that were struggling during the pandemic relief grants, whether that was for their personal, expenses or the businesses and initiatives that they were running, which we're very proud of to be able to provide that at a time that was, a really challenging time for everyone. We also, since then, have launched an initiative actually last year giving 25K unrestricted capital grants to women of color founders in partnership with a corporate pager duty that does really great work and also is very intentional about diversity and equity. And we have a hiring platform, which we built on the back end of our website, where women of color can go in, create a profile, request introductions to corporates and organizations. And there's, of course, a job board alongside that where corporates and organizations can list their job boards for our network. And we now reach over, and we haven't run the numbers in a while, honestly, but I would say last year, we reached over 5,000 women of color across the globe. So that's, yeah, the
Wow.
story of the collective I built and ran. And sometimes I forget that I'm doing that as well alongside everything else. But it's really been self sustaining because it's a community and everyone really shows up to support one another.
Okay. And the hiring platform focuses only on in the US or globally?
No, globally, actually. Yeah, we've already seen a number of companies, yeah, post jobs and also hire from our network
Wow.
globally. Yeah,
Nice, nice, nice. That's amazing.
thank you.
Your work has been recognized. Your name has been in the Forbes 30 under 30, in the Nasdaq's Women's to Watch. If you could go back and give yourself an advice at the start of your career, what would that be?
Yeah. Um, I think to carve your own path, someone asked me not that long ago, what was the worst advice you've been given? And I told them, I remember being, a younger woman starting out my career, and someone said, go find someone who you admire, look at their profile, where have they worked, what have they done, and follow, what they've done. And I think for some people that might be okay advice, right? So I don't want to say that that was the worst advice ever. I just think for me personally, I realized how unhelpful that advice was for me as someone who has always been curious and really, when we think about where the world is and a lot of our pressing challenges, we don't really need to do the same things that have been done. We need to be thinking outside of the box, adding an additional or unique lens. And so I would really go back to my younger self and say, hey, certainly respect and admire folks for the work that they've done in the world, but then ask what are the areas that they maybe aren't exploring, or where are the gaps that you even see in their existing work,
Mm,
and does that excite you? Are you good at any of those gaps that you're identifying, and can you build in that space? And building in that space doesn't have to be being an entrepreneur. Obviously I am, but it can be being an entrepreneur. Can you go into a large corporate and launch a new arm or launch a new tool or a new practice? And for years I was an entrepreneur. I launched 2 new practices at my prior firm. And then I ended up going in house somewhere where I launched another new initiative. So I think when we think about building, I would really say, think about the gaps that exist, admire and learn from what people have done before, but then ask yourself, how can you take it a step further and build something that's new or unique or has a novel approach, and gets us further, I think, want to see in the world. And that has really been, the way I've crafted my career. I think it's
mm,
been a journey of like pure curiosity and like, well, why can't we do it this way? Or, is there another way to explore a solution in a space? And it's really served me. But I think more importantly, it's helped me enjoy my journey. So I'm not just, building a career where everything is about, certainly I appreciate the recognition and the acknowledgement, but I'm also having fun and I know that I'm having an impact. And I think when you can find that intersection of what am I good at, what does the world need, and where is the opportunity to really do something different, I think that's where we all really excel. So that's what I would tell my younger self.
I love it. Do you have any books or resources that you would like to share with our audience that might were helpful for you?
Yeah, I'm a big bookworm. I definitely read a lot of books. I really love the book Grit, and of course, I'm blanking on the author, but I read that book years ago and just enjoyed the story of how do you think about resilience as you do things. I mean, I just mentioned go find gaps, do something new and novel. The reality of doing that is that it requires a very strong sense of confidence, right? And exploring something new and saying, I'm going to double down on it and figure it out. And I think Grit was one of the first books that I read that really gave me a framework for thinking about how do you build resilience, right? As someone trying to do anything new. Some other books that I have really, or just resources that I've enjoyed, just from a climate tech perspective, really enjoy the Climate Tech VC newsletter. I think they do a really great job of talking about climate tech, not just from a deals perspective, but also how are we understanding the capital stack across the industry. I wrote articles for the Milken Institute, and so I like a lot of their I forget what they call the series of essays that they do, but I think it's the ideas, something like the public ideas essay series. And I really love that they take people who are leading in their industry and give them a platform to say, you know, what do you see in your space? What's missing? What would you like to focus on, or where do you think the industry is moving? And then probably just more technical things. I do read infrastructure investor. I love reading about infrastructure projects globally and sort of where are we seeing the updates of railways and bridges and highways and all these things that I think we have really taken for granted, right? Particularly now because we're just so used to well working infrastructure in many parts of the world, but realizing that, someone had to double down and create the policy and the financing for all of these really huge capital projects that like run the world that we live in. And I'm sure, given your team's focused on shipping and logistics, you all think about that every day. So those are definitely some of the resources and just books that I've read over the years that I really enjoy. I'm sure there's many more that will come to mind after this conversation, but yeah, that's what I have at the moment.
Perfect. I will look into the resources you provided and share with the audience as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Shante. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. I think, there's so much opportunity to advance climate right now. We know that there's a lot of gaps. And so I'm most excited about like who is going to take the lead and explore those gaps and say, hey, let's do something different, whether that's focusing on first of a kind facilities and projects, or particularly when we think about where resources have gone historically, it's been primarily to mitigation, but how do we focus on adaptation and resiliency, right? What does it look like to really innovate in those areas, fund those areas, and ultimately protect the communities that are already being impacted by the climate crisis? And then community building. I know I love the work that I do. I think climate is one of the best areas to be, working in right now. And I think it's also pretty hard to find an entry point if you haven't been in sustainability or climate historically. So I think I'm really interested in the communities that are helping folks navigate how they can be a part of the climate movement, even if they don't have, the industry expertise or knowledge. So yeah, if you're doing any or all of those things, I'm just cheering for you, rooting for you, and excited to hopefully follow, your work as well.
Perfect, amazing, and we may find some opportunities to collaborate as well. That would have been amazing. So thanks a
Yeah.
lot for your time and valuable insights. Let's Shanta's journey serve as a reminder that with determination and hard work, we can all make a significant impact on our planet. To all women listening, I urge you to be inspired by Shanta's story and achievement and chase your dreams fearlessly. Together, we can create a more sustainable and equitable future for generations to come. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, let's continue to work towards a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for listening.